Today we are making the Chives Canadian Bistro Buttermilk Biscuit. And this is probably the most requested recipe that I'm asked for and have been for 20 years. And as you well know, Jason, you were there that night, there's a story about how we got to this recipe. So opening night of Chives, I had conceived this idea in my head of having a brown paper bag with a Chives logo on it, and had various types of bread, homemade bread, focaccias and breadsticks and et cetera, all sticking out of this bag. Well, about an hour before opening night service, somebody told me that none of the bread had been ordered. Everyone forgot in the stress of the moment. We had no time to bake bread. And I just sort of panicked on the spot, and I picked up the phone. I called our mother and I said, what's Nanny's tea biscuit recipe? So I wrote it down over the phone. I changed basically the milk to buttermilk, and I changed the margarine to butter, and this buttermilk biscuit was born. And the other thing was we were so rushed that I didn't do the usual maritime rollout and cut them and glaze them with buttermilk or milk on the top like a tea biscuit. I just took a spoon and I plopped them down. And the end result was sort of little shards of crispy bits on the outside because they were so irregularly shaped, but soft in the middle. And we had a clunky old convection oven at Chives in the early years, but it produced the best biscuits. So sometimes the home ovens don't quite do the same, but we're going to try to replicate it as best I can. And there's a very specific way. We made these every single day for 20 years, without exception, fresh every day. And this is the way I started to make them. Obviously, staff modified it over 20 years, but this is the original method. And it even comes down to the key. For me, this is all you need to make these biscuits, a fork. So we have got buttermilk, we have flour, we have butter, we have eggs, baking powder, a little bit of sugar, a pinch of salt, and that is all you need to make a great biscuit. So here is how you do it. First, let's grab a grater. I've got 1 cup of butter. Grab a grater and grate all of this butter into the flour. Now, I just kind of realized it. You know what? We said we're going to film our mistakes in Slightli Chefi, and I just made a mistake, Jay. Do you know what it was? You know what it was?
Nope.
I was supposed to put the sugar, baking powder, and salt into the flour and whisk it through before the butter. But I'm not overly concerned about it. We can do that because we're going to work this butter through so much that all of those additional dry ingredients will get worked through as well. So no panic. I didn't do it the way I normally do it, but we can still figure it out.
But like you just told in the story, sometimes mistakes make special moments, and
yeah, this is a special moment that this mistake is definitely made. Special. All right.
That's a lot of nice butter there.
That's a lot of butter. So the second step is to toss the grated butter into the flour and try to keep it as separate as you can so you get these such strands. Now another trick that a lot of people do is use frozen butter. And you get these nice little chips of butter that go all through and they hold their shape. And I have made frozen butter biscuits. They're a little bit of a different consistency. In my mind, they work a bit better for a rolled biscuit because it layers the fat and the dough, and they sort of rise almost like a puff pastry. They're beautiful biscuit, but they have a different consistency. So I've got the sugar now. Sugar's going to go in. That was 4 teaspoons of sugar, 4 teaspoons of baking powder. I'm going to grab a half a teaspoon of sea salt. Put that in there, and you can adjust that. If you're using unsalted butter, you might want a full teaspoon. But I have salted butter today, so I'm just going to use a half. So that's the first step, so coating the butter, but it's still too large. So you grab your fork, and you can use a pastry cutter. I don't own a pastry cutter, I never have, but I use a fork. And I'll just go around the outside of the bowl, turning the bowl and working that butter into the flour till it gets into a pea meal little consistency.
I actually remember doing this at Chives one night. There was a year I worked at Chives.
Yeah.
And I didn't do a whole lot of the cooking back there, but I was trusted enough to take my fork through and chop up the butter.
That's because it's an exhausting job that I don't want to do myself every day.
Okay.
That's why I got
Thanks
you
for
to do
that.
it. Well, just we have to be honest with each other at this late stage of life. Anyway, so we're gonna keep working this through, and the thing about this is it can be slightly irregular. It has to be worked in fairly well, but the odd little supersized lump of butter is not going to greatly affect the consistency here. Now, at this stage, I've sort of got them relatively small, and I go in now with my hands. So minimize the amount that my hands are in here. And I will work them just a little bit, but what I'm really doing here is I'm feeling through for larger little bits of butter that I might have missed. Like say those two there, just little bits. And what I do is I take my palm and I just sort of rub them like that, and it causes them to flake. So I'll go through and I'll just feel those few little pieces of larger butter that are in there and just push it through, flatten it, and then flake it. And that's all you kind of need to do to get to that final consistency of sort of cornmeal, or maybe pea meal is probably an easier way to think of it. All right?
Yeah.
Just about there. And I think we're there. So as I go through this, I can't really, I sort of toss it through and I can't really feel any large pieces of butter that I've missed. So I think we're good. All right, so I'm gonna wash my hands and we'll come back for the egg portion.
Okay, so now we have that ready to go. We're gonna add the eggs and the buttermilk. Now, we are in the midst of winter, and flour in winter is a lot drier than in the summer when the humidity is higher. So this recipe uses sort of 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk as the base. I know from experience that it's gonna need a little more than that, closer to 1 1/2 cups. The other thing is I usually use large eggs. These are extra large eggs just because that's what I have today. So I think that extra large size will help these biscuits, considering the dryness of the air right now. So there's sometimes a little bit of a little movement that you can do in the liquid ingredients, and you have to sort of judge a bit. So here's 1 and just under 1 1/2 cups of buttermilk in with the 3 eggs. 1, 2, and 3. And then take a fork and beat. And it doesn't have to be super well beaten, but just make sure that that egg yolk is broken up. And now we can go in. So I'm gonna make a slight well with my other fork, and I'm gonna pour the egg and buttermilk into that well, almost like making pasta. But we're not gonna work it as much. And the reason I do this is this. No spoon, no mixer. You can use a mixer if you're careful, but it's really easy to overbeat these and you want them tender. So what I do is I do this method. I start, because of the shape of the fork, on the outside of the bowl, and I follow along and I come up in the middle and turn it over. That's the motion. And then with my left hand, I do like a 3-inch turn. And then over here, and then over here. And then I just speed it up. Because the idea is I want this to come together, and the shape of the fork is moving all of the dry ingredients that are on the side and on the bottom, and I'm making sure that I'm getting all of that up and through. If you mix too shallow, you'll form a dough, but you'll have so much dry stuff on the bottom that by the time you end up incorporating it, you've now kneaded the dough too much, and the biscuits will be not as tender. So even right now, you can see it's come together fairly well. Now, remember that dry humidity? That is showing itself really well. I've done the extra large egg, and I've done it, and I still have too dry dough. That's because it's January. So before I knead too much, I'm gonna add another 1/4 cup of buttermilk just over the top. I've done this many times. It will, as long as you do it early on, you can still get it to incorporate. And this is just one of those feel things you get from making this recipe for
the better part of 22 years now, or
Right.
I guess more than that. Okay, and as it comes together, I'm just sort of bringing it through.
And this still is a requested recipe when you do catering events.
Every event I do starts with biscuits. And this is the base recipe that we served in the a la carte restaurant, but you can add all kinds of flavoring to this. Now that is the right consistency. So it's not a wet dough, but it's also not really, really dry. It's spongy. I've minimized the mixing, and I don't have any, I've got it all up into the dough. There's no dry on the bottom, and that's key. So it's basically, it's come together as a dough in the minimum amount of strokes as possible to keep them tender. All right, so now let's assemble. So finished dough ready to go onto a baking tray. I've got Silpat sheets here. You can use parchment if you like. Non-stick foil works great too. I spent many years just forming these with a spoon in my hand. Plop in that, I remember how I said we rushed it that night? Well, it was literally like,
Yeah.
that's kind of how it all started. We sort of refined it a bit using a scoop. So what I do is I take a heaping scoop. I still want these to look natural, however. So instead of doing them like this and scooping them so they have this perfect rounded top, I scoop them into my hand and then flip them over and sort of rest them like that and just do a little bit of a pinch with my fingers. And you can see how it sort of creates these irregular edges. So you get a natural looking biscuit, but the scoop also, helps us speed up production when we're on busy nights, etc. But it really is important to do this. If you want that sort of crunchy exterior, to do it in a way that you create these edges at the top. And a couple of pinches from your fingers just at the top, you can do that. So I'm going to speed these up. They go into a 400-degree oven until they're nice and crispy brown. It depends on your oven. If you've got a convection, it might take 16 minutes. If you've got a really strong commercial oven, it takes 12 to 13. If you don't have convection, it might go as long as 20 minutes. So in my oven, it takes about 16 minutes on 400. So I'm just going to power through these, bake them, and we'll see the end result. Chives Buttermilk Biscuit. There you go. Great with molasses. I know you've had it with molasses.
I have.
Just butter today. Huh.
Nailed it.
If I had a microphone here, you would hear the crunch.
I think I actually can hear the crunch.
There's a reason it's a classic. It's really good. Super soft in the middle, crunchy on the outside, buttery, amazing. If you like this, please hit the like, click subscribe. Try that again. Don't try it again. Help us grow by clicking like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell too. Until then, I'm going to go and sit and eat 6 of these. Cheers.